My goal this morning is to get you absolutely, completely, and totally bored. All right. Truthfully though, honestly, my goal this morning is to get you absolutely, completely, and totally bored. Why? Because kingdom healing is not partial. Because kingdom healing is not halfway. Because kingdom healing is not in part. Kingdom healing is complete. Kingdom healing is whole. Kingdom healing attacks all that Satan accomplished in the fall, and it will not allow a single victory. So, my goal today is to get you totally and completely bored. I've been very convicted that I don't get bored enough. I mean, honestly, it's really actually hard to get bored. I mean, there's always something to do, and there's always somewhere to go, and there's always another book to read, and always another lesson to write, and there's always something. But I've been really convicted that I don't get bored enough. And I'm not talking about just not being busy, and I'm not even talking about getting more Sabbath, although I think those are a part of it. But God specifically has been convicting me to become more bored. It actually started stirring a couple of weeks ago. I was reading this article about this Michigan-based mortgage company called United Shores. And United Shores has what they call a firm 40 principle. And the principle is pretty simple, although hard to execute. The simple principle is this: you work 40 hours and then you're done. Period. No exceptions. I mean, you work 40 hours really hard. They even say, listen, 4:55 on Friday has no different of an intensity as 10:55 on a Tuesday. You work 40 hours and you work them really hard. But after 40 hours, you are done. No exceptions. You cannot work 45 hours. You cannot finish your 40 hours and then go home and answer emails or make phone calls to clients. No, you work 40 hours and you're done. And what they have found is that actually their productivity has not dropped. Actually, it's risen. Because they have less wasted time. They have less mistakes because their workers are more refreshed. Their workers are healthier and happier. And I was reading this article and I thought, I wonder what it would take for me to have a firm 40 principle in my own life. And so I began calculating, thinking I'm not that far off. And I was shocked. Actually, it's probably better to say I was deeply disappointed. Because I realized that without even trying on accident, I was accidentally averaging 50 to 60 hours a week. And I told my wife, and she lovingly reminded me that I also have the nasty habit of preaching on a Wednesday night or going to a church on the weekend, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday Revelation seminar. And she said, and then you don't actually take any time to compensate for that. I was disappointed. Because I truly believe that if you are overworked and you become too tired, that we become vulnerable to temptation. We become vulnerable to foolishness. It's just not wise. And I was really disappointed. And not just because I didn't have a schedule that gave me enough rest so I could be a good husband and a good father. But I was disappointed because I was not allowing myself any time to just get bored. So I began to ask myself this question. If we never get bored, what do we lose? I mean, if we were in a state of perpetual distraction, of endless busyness, if we never get bored, what do we lose? I mean, in our society, and I'm not even just talking about America, I'm talking about Ozark. It's kind of hard to get bored. I mean, we live at a point in history, unlike any point in history, that we have the opportunity to never, ever be bored. From iPhones to text messages to the internet to Google Glasses, then you add on top of that the busyness of school and of work. We can be perpetually distracted because there is always something to do and always something to view. But if we never get bored, what are we losing? Now, whenever I'm talking about boredom, I'm not talking about idleness. I'm not talking about the frivolity that many of us engage when we are resting with Netflix binges or mass social media consumption. That's not boredom. Those are distractions. Those just numb us to the world around us. Kind of like busyness and like workaholism. I mean, the reality is this: idleness and busyness are two sides of the same coin. They're just two different ways to escape the world. No, that's not boredom. Boredom is a collision of inactivity and activity. Boredom is an opportunity to become truly human. You see, whenever I'm bored, it's this array of emotions. I mean, I can't figure out if I'm frustrated or if I'm content or if I'm completely discontent or if I'm an amalgamation of all those and even more emotions. I mean, whenever I am the most bored, I don't know what I want. And I don't know what I don't want. It's like I don't want to read, but I don't want to not read. I mean, it's like I don't want to be idle, but I don't want to go exercise. It's like I sit down, I stand up, I pace around, I go over, I look out the window, I fiddle with a book. In sum, when I am bored, I drive my wife insane. I mean, I drive her absolutely insane because when I'm bored, I don't know what I want, but I just know I want something to be different. I want something to be different, anything to be different. I have a deep desire and a longing for something to shift. A deep desire for transformation. When I'm bored, I have the opportunity to be truly human. Because I agree with Rowan Williams whenever he says the definition of true humanity is to be in longing, is to desire. Because God is at rest in himself. Because he is sustained in his being by himself. But humans are sustained by that which is external to us. Humans are sustained and fulfilled by that which is beyond us, by that which is outside of us. And it is in our longing, it is in boredom, where we truly can become human. I mean, it's as Augustine says in Confessions, Book 1. He says, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. If we are perpetually distracted, if we are endlessly busy, man, if we never get bored, what do we lose? I think it's this. We lose the deep craving for something to be different. We lose the intense stirring for transformation. We lose the opportunity to be truly human. And so my goal for you this morning is for you to become completely and thoroughly bored. Because I believe that boredom is the entry point to kingdom healing. Acts chapter 3 is the text that this really started to come and hit me right in the face I mean, Peter and John, they're walking to the afternoon worship session. They're walking and they come across this gate called Beautiful. And it's at the foot of this gate, it's underneath this gate it's underneath the gate called Beautiful that sat the ugly. It's underneath the gate called Beautiful that sat the shameful, the forgotten, the outcast. And as Peter and John came up to the gate called Beautiful, they encountered a common fixture of this gate. And I'm not talking about the door itself, and I'm not even talking about the sights and the smells of the sacrifices at the 9th hour. No, I'm talking about a particular beggar. A beggar that was a veteran of his trade. I mean, Acts chapter 4, verse 22 tells us that the beggar was over 40 years old. Acts chapter 3, verse 2 tells us that this beggar was lame from birth. Acts chapter 3, verse 10 tells us this beggar was well known by everybody that came. He was a common fixture at the gate called Beautiful. Because day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, for 40 years, he sat underneath this gate and watched fathers walk by with their families, barely even glancing at him. He sat at this gate and he would watch the city of Jerusalem swell with the time that the Jewish festivals were happening, where people were coming from all over, from far and from wide. They were coming to worship God, to offer sacrifices, to join in with the community festival while he sat and begged. Beneath the gate called Beautiful, for over 40 years, this man sat while the name of the gate mocked him. And like the nation of Israel that was wandering for 40 years, I think when you look at this man, I think you would see someone that was just bored. Just longing for something to be different. As he sees Peter and John coming his way, as was his custom, he cries out to them in his shame. He says, "Sirs, do you have any change? Any silver, any gold, anything?" Because you see, this man was a burden for his family. I mean, from the moment this kid was born and he was lame and not able to walk, he was a drain on the honor of his family. He was a constant reminder, maybe in God's disappointment. Maybe it was his parents' sin, or maybe it was his own. His existence shamed his family, and with every coin, he is hoping he can contribute something back to the family that his very existence shames. Sirs, do you have any change? Any silver, any gold? And in Acts chapter 3, verse 4, the text says, Peter and John looked straight at him. Looked straight at him. That Greek word means to look intently, a piercing gaze. They looked straight at him. And when I read that verse, I can't help but ask the question, I wonder what they saw. I wonder what they saw. There at the foot of the gate called Beautiful, when they looked at this lame man, I wonder what Peter and John saw. I wonder if they saw the pain of knowing from a young age he would never have a family of his own. I wonder if they saw the pain of knowing he would never go into the temple of God to worship himself. I wonder if they saw the pain of a man who was just bored. You know, when the Pope came to America recently, whenever I was watching him, whenever I'd watch the reports, he reminded me of someone that was just bored. I mean, bored with politics, bored with the way of doing religion. I mean, whenever he landed, the Pope was offered this invitation to a posh meal with these, rich politicians and these big donors. And the Pope rejected the invitation and decided to eat with the homeless and the poor. Whenever he landed, he was offered this nice limousine, and instead he chose a simple Fiat. I mean, the Pope just reminded me of a guy that was bored. And there was this interesting moment right before the Pope addressed the joint meeting of Congress, a very historical moment. I mean, yes, it began with this bombastic adulation. You know, the guy cries out, "Mr. Speaker, I present to you the Pope of the Holy See." And everybody stands up and they're clapping and the ovation begins. And the Pope emerges from the tunnel and he emerges with a huge smile on his face. And after about 4 or 5 steps, the smile kind of dissipates. And it's replaced with almost a disinterested smirk. But he's polite, and so he's walking up to the podium, and he's waving and nodding and kind of smiling. And he finally gets up to the podium where he's going to give his address. And then it got really awkward because they wouldn't stop clapping. They just kept clapping and clapping, and the commentator, speaks over, and he's like, "The Pope is allowing the ovation to wash over him." And I was like, no, he's tolerating it. Like he's just enduring it. And in the middle of the ovation, all of a sudden, behind him, a gavel strikes 3 times. And the Pope's kind of startled. He looks up and he sees there's another podium above his with the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and with Vice President Joe Biden. And everybody is silent at the strike of the gavel. And John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, says, "Members of Congress, it is my distinct honor and privilege to present to you Pope Francis of the Holy See." And then they all start clapping again. And the Pope kind of looks out at the audience, and he kind of looks up at Joe Biden, and he just and he steps forward and shakes Biden's hand. And then he steps forward and he shakes John Boehner's hand. And then something interesting happened right at that moment. John Boehner reaches down, and he shakes the Pope's hand, and he immediately stares forward and begins clapping, refusing to make eye contact with the Pope. And for about 4 or 5 seconds on the video, the Pope just looked at the face of John Boehner intently with a piercing gaze. And I remember whenever I saw that moment, I remember asking myself, I wonder what he sees. I wonder what he sees. I wonder if he sees a wounded man. I wonder if he sees someone that is just broken by this world. I wonder if he sees a guy that's just bored. The next morning, I was actually really shocked because I woke up and I saw the news that John Boehner had unexpectedly resigned from his post as Speaker of the House. One of the most powerful positions in the United States. He resigned from it. I mean, for 40 years, John Boehner had been working towards this position. For 40 years, he'd been fighting for a position of power in politics for 40 years. And then after one day, one encounter with the Pope, he unexpectedly gets up from his seat. He unexpectedly rises from his seat of influence and walks away. I wonder what he saw. In chapter 3, the last half of verse 4, it says, Peter said, "Look at us." And expecting to receive some donation, expecting some sort of gift, the beggar looks up at Peter and John. And then in verse 6, the next words that Peter speaks, it probably rattled the resolve of this beggar. "Silver or gold I do not have. Silver or gold I do not have." Man, I've had that verse quoted at me a time or two in rebuke. I've had that verse quoted at me a couple of times chastising me. See, whenever you speak out about biblical justice issues, or if you have long hair like a hippie or a homeless person, this verse will be thrown at you a couple of times. In the fall of 2009, my family and I, we moved to Edinburgh, Scotland to start my doctoral work. And while we were there, we befriended a homeless woman. And she couldn't speak English really well. We thought she probably was a refugee. But we did find out eventually her name was Rebecca. And every day that we would walk by this beautiful old church building, right on the front steps, that was her spot. And every day, whether we were going to the market or whether we were going to the university or whether we were going home, every day we would stop by the steps of that beautiful, beautiful church building. And we would give her some money. It became such a routine that my kids would actually get excited whenever they came to that beautiful church building. And almost every time, my daughter Paige, who was around 3 or 4, she would take the money in her hand, and she would stretch out her little hand from the stroller, and she'd place the money in Rebecca's hand, and then Rebecca would grab her hand, and she would lightly kiss my daughter's hand. We tried many times to talk with her, but the language barrier was just too much. And so for 3 months, all we could do is give her silver and gold, and smiles and eye contact, and the hand of my baby girl. Our last day in Scotland was very overwhelming. We'd grown to love Rebecca. And we knew that she also had grown to love us. And on the last day in Scotland, while our suitcases were all packed and we were making our last trek to the apartment, we came by that beautiful church building. And my daughter reached out her hand and gave a deposit and received a kiss. And then my wife got down eye level with Rebecca. And she said, I know you can't understand what I'm saying, but I want you to know that we love you. And we think you are so beautiful. And Jesus does too. And my prayer is that you will know him, and that you will embrace him and let him embrace you. And as I looked down at my wife through blurry eyes, I could see Rebecca weeping. I saw her squeezing my wife's hand and gave her a big hug. And as we walked away, I remember seeing a slight smile on Rebecca's face. Shortly after we got home, I was at a church and I was talking about our time with Rebecca. When I was there, I was talking about how much she had influenced us. And somebody kind of got upset with me. And afterwards they came up to me and they asked me a question that comes from Acts chapter 3, verse 6. They said, you gave her money? And I said, well, yes. He said, well, you shouldn't have done that. And I said, well, I'm sorry, what? Why? He said, well, when Peter and John came to a lame man at the gate called Beautiful, he didn't give him silver and gold. He gave him Jesus. You should have preached to her Jesus. Don't give him money. And I didn't really know what to say. I mean, it was kind of hard to argue with. That is what the text says. But I remember sitting there at a loss of words, and I remember just feeling really bored. Bored with that kind of answer. Bored with that kind of disposition. I remember just feeling like something has to be different than this. And then I read the rest of the verse. Oh, it says, silver or gold I do not have. But what I do have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, get up and walk. Get up and walk. You see, he was right. Peter and John did not just give this man silver and gold. But Peter and John also didn't just preach a sermon and walk away. Peter and John also didn't just give this man the miracle of walking. Peter and John gave him the opportunity to have a family. They gave him the opportunity to no longer be in shame. They gave him the opportunity to walk through the gate called Beautiful and to worship God in the temple himself. Peter and John gave him kingdom healing because they gave him Jesus. And when Jesus heals, it is never in part. It is never halfway. When Jesus heals, it is complete. It is whole. Not one victory from Genesis 3 is left behind when Jesus heals. No, Peter and John did not give him silver or gold. They gave him kingdom healing. They gave him the answer to his boredom. If we never get bored, what do we lose? If we never get bored, what do we lose? Because boredom ignites a stirring. Boredom ignites this restlessness. Boredom ignites an opportunity for transformation. It's the reason why my goal this morning is for you to get thoroughly bored. Because I'm afraid if we don't get bored, that we may wake up tomorrow no different than we are today. Sealing off areas in our life that desperately need grace. I want you to become bored. Bored with the violence all around you. Bored with the poverty that is destroying people's lives. Bored with racial divisions. Bored with refugees. Bored with complacency. Bored with selfishness. I want you to become bored with yourself. Because the more I engage boredom, the more I understand that what needs to change is me. I want you to become bored with your wounds. Bored with your ego, bored with your sins, bored with waking up every morning and running away from the pain from your past. I want you to become bored so that you can become a catalyst for kingdom healing. When I was writing this sermon, I hit a point where I got really, really bored. And instead of embracing the boredom that I'm preaching about, I decided to give in to the almighty distraction known as Facebook. Have you ever heard of it? And yet what I meant as a distraction, I believe God meant for my transformation. The very first post I saw was actually from an Ozark alum named Mariano Rogers. And it's the first line that really caught me. And it's the rest of it that really taught me. The first line says, "It just so happened by chance today that I happened to meet the man who shot and killed my father 21 years ago. Now, a long time ago, hurt and confused by the events that happened, young child stored up so much hate and anger inside of him that it would consume him at times. Growing up, I had so much hate and anger in me directed at two people who hurt and wronged me and affected my life for the rest of my life. And now today, I got to look at my father's murderer and tell him wholeheartedly that I forgive him. And I can't imagine living with all that on you. I know it's gotten to have taken a toll on him. It would on me. I also got to share with him how for many years of my life, how I wished he were dead or that I thought about killing him myself. I mean, that wouldn't fix anything, of course. But those feelings no longer reside in my heart, soul, or mind any longer because I have truly given that hate, anger, and pain over to God. Giving my life to God and giving him this most painful and tragic event that has happened in my life has been the best decision I could have ever made. Now, I should tell you, that wasn't an easy, short process to go through to get fixed. It took well over 10 years for me. But the power of forgiveness is amazing, and we all could use it and implement it into our daily lives. It is through Christ that I'm able to forgive and to love. Is it for you as well? I hope so, he says. What are you holding on to in your life today? What do you need to give up to God? Talk to him today and tell him what's on your heart and mind, and let him work in your life through your struggles, hurts, and pains. Glory be to God. Forgiveness, he knows. Redeemer. In this post, I'm reminded of the power of boredom. I'm reminded of the insatiable desire to want to become someone different. I'm reminded that kingdom healing is complete. Kingdom healing is whole. Kingdom healing will not allow Satan to have a single victory. I'm reminded that kingdom healing looks an awful lot like this.